Charles I was born on November 19, 1600, in Dunfermline. As a child, he faced health challenges, such as being unable to speak until he turned 5 and having weak ankles that forced him to crawl on hands and knees until the age of 7. Despite these early setbacks, he overcame them, developing into a skilled juicer and marksman. He also excelled as a scholar and devotedly studied theology. At his baptism, he was given the title Duke of Albany, followed by Duke of York in 1605, and finally, Prince of Wales in 1616, after the death of his older brother, Prince Henry, making him the heir to 3 kingdoms. The idea of a potential marriage alliance with Spain had been discussed as early as 1614, but it wasn't until February 17, 1623, that Charles, accompanied by his close friend Buckingham, embarked on a secretive journey to Madrid. Their mission was twofold: to seek the hand of the Infanta in marriage, and to secure the return of the Palatinate to his brother-in-law, Frederick. Both Charles and his father made promises to accommodate the Catholics, but the Spanish and papal courts insisted on his conversion, leading to growing tensions. Charles returned to England on October 5, eager to break ties with Spain. The nation's happiness was quickly overshadowed by his engagement to the French princess, Henrietta Maria, 1609–69. The marriage contract committed him to breaking solemn promises to Parliament, as it allowed her and all her household members the unrestricted practice of the Catholic faith, and granted her control over the upbringing of their children until they reached the age of 13. On March 27, 1625, Charles ascended to the throne following his father, James I. On June 13th, he warmly welcomed his young and bright-eyed queen at Dover, having previously married her through a proxy arrangement 6 weeks earlier. In less than a year, he decided to send her troublesome entourage back to France. This group included a bishop and 29 priests, along with 410 other male and female attendants. From then on, their domestic life together was quite content, and over the 12 years following the assassination of Buckingham, 1592–1628, who had previously manipulated Charles, the king gradually yielded more to his wife's unwise influence, although not entirely, when compared to figures like Stafford or Laud. Laud, who became archbishop in 1633, embarked on a campaign against the prevailing Puritanism, preaching the doctrine of passive obedience and advocating the divine right of kings. On the other hand, Stafford, who had initially supported the Petition of Right 1628, switched allegiances to serve the king and embraced a policy known as thorough, aiming to establish absolute rule. During the first 4 years of Charles's reign, 3 parliaments were summoned and dissolved, after which Charles ruled for 11 years with only 1 parliament, alongside compliant judges, and the courts of Star Chamber and High Commission. In 1627, Charles found himself embroiled in an unimpressive war with France. However, he eventually made peace with France in 1629 and with Spain in 1630. His policy centered on achieving peace, financial prudence, and arbitrary taxation to resolve the pressing issue of acquiring funds while avoiding accountability. Charles was not particularly driven by financial gain or far-reaching tyranny, as evidenced by his rejection of Stafford's plan. Instead, he had inherited a profound sense of self-importance, with a focus on his own small world and limited sympathy for the heroic spirit of the Tudor era or the emerging enthusiasm for democracy. When the ship tax was extended to inland counties in 1637, it was met with Hampden's passive resistance. Laud's attempt to Anglicize the Scottish Church faced active resistance from the entire northern nation. Charles was forced to call 2 parliaments in 1640, the Short Parliament, which lasted only 3 weeks, and the Long Parliament, which outlasted Charles himself. It convened with the purpose of passing judgment on Stafford, and when his conspiracy with the army was uncovered, Charles shamefully abandoned his loyal servant, breaking his own royal promise out of concern for the Queen's safety. this decision would weigh heavily on him in the future. The same signature that condemned Stafford to execution also approved another bill, stipulating that the current Parliament could not be dissolved without its own consent. Charles, though compelled to agree under duress, had intentions of disregarding this pledge. During his visit to Edinburgh in the autumn of 1641, Charles sought to win over the Scots by making generous concessions. However, he found himself embroiled in dark suspicions, including allegations of plotting the murder of the Covenanting lords and even involvement in the Ulster massacre. Nevertheless, upon his return to London, he was welcomed with some enthusiasm. A faction was emerging in the House of Commons itself, composed of individuals who were apprehensive of the sweeping changes threatening both the church and the state. Pym's grand remonstrance validated their concerns, and Charles appeared to confirm their fears when he attempted to arrest the 5 members on January 4, 1642. However, this ill-fated move was prompted by his awareness of an imminent impeachment of the Queen herself. On August 22, Charles raised the royal standard in Nottingham, marking the commencement of a 4-year civil war. During this conflict, as seen in battles like Naseby, he displayed unwavering physical courage. However, the Battle of Naseby on June 14, 1645, resulted in the complete defeat of his cause. There's no need to delve into the intricate web of plots and counterplots involving Catholics, Presbyterians, sectaries, Scots, Irish, Parliament, and the army. It suffices to note that after leaving his final sanctuary in Oxford, Charles surrendered on May 5, 1646, to the Scots in Newark. Subsequently, in January of the following year, he was handed over to Parliament. His captivity unfolded over several locations: 4 months at Holmby House near Northampton, a seizure by Cornet Joyce on June 3rd, 3 months at Hampton Court, a skirmish on November 11th, and renewed captivity at Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight. These events set the stage for the trial of Charles Stuart in Westminster, where he was accused of tyranny, treason, and murder. Having taken up arms, Charles met his demise by the same means, as it was the army, not Parliament, that supported the judges. Charles faced his accusers with courage and dignity. 3 times, he refused to enter a plea, challenging the authority of the court. When his refusal was treated as a confession, 55 out of 71 judges, with 64 absent, affixed their names and seals to his death warrant. 4 days later, the sentence was pronounced. There's no need to recount the well-documented account of his patience in the face of persecution, the heart-wrenching farewell to 2 of his younger children, or his preparations for a righteous death. On the morning of January 30, 1649, he met his end with great courage on the scaffold in front of Whitehall, demonstrating the resolve of a true martyr. On the snowy 7th of February, they laid the White King to rest in Windsor. In 1813, the Prince Regent had his leaden coffin opened. 6 children outlived him: Charles and James, who succeeded him; Mary, Princess of Orange, 1631–60, Elizabeth, 1635–50, Henry, Duke of Gloucester, 1639–60, and Henrietta, Duchess of Orleans, 1644–70, born 10 weeks after Charles's final parting from his queen. During the Restoration, Charles II unilaterally introduced a prayer and fasting service commemorating the martyrdom of the blessed King Charles I, which was included in the Common Prayer Book alongside other state services. This commemoration remained in the Common Prayer Book until 1859. Even a much stronger individual than Charles might have struggled to navigate the challenges he faced, although it's true that many of those challenges were of his own making. However, was it the right decision to abandon Stafford? Should he have been willing to sacrifice his wife, his faith, and his crown? If the answer is yes, then he was entirely in the wrong. If the answer is no, then at least on this particular matter, he was partly justified. Charles had vices, aside from his duplicity, in the way we commonly understand the term. He often appeared indecisive, vacillating, and stubborn, unable to effectively lead or be led. He had superstitious tendencies and paid close attention to omens. He could be unsympathetic and reserved in situations where he did not feel affection, and he had little tolerance for opposition to his desires. Nevertheless, he was a devoted husband, a loving father, and a committed churchman. It's a rarity to find a man who, despite being a flawed king, excelled in these personal roles. Charles had a genuine belief in his own infallibility, even if his actions sometimes contradicted this belief. He was sincere in his convictions, and his duplicity sometimes arose from his education in the principles of kingship, as well as his inability to see both sides of an issue simultaneously. At different times, he could see one side or the other but rarely managed to perceive both perspectives at once, which was reflected in his communication. Milton's accusations of all manner of lewdness against him should be regarded in the same light as Milton's claim that Charles poisoned his father. In fact, when it comes to culture and moral purity, few monarchs are as deserving of praise as Charles. All his children held him in high regard and affection. His young daughter Elizabeth, who was kept captive by his adversaries, penned words of such compassionate and admiring nature towards him that even today, it stirs emotions and brings tears to our eyes. His final letter of guidance to his son Charles stands as an exemplary piece of counsel that can scarcely be surpassed. Some portions of it are expressed as follows. I had rather you should be Charles Le Bon than Le Grand, good, than great. I hope God hath designed you to be both, having so early put you into that exercise of his graces and gifts bestowed upon you, which may best weed out all vicious inclinations, and dispose you to those princely endowments and employments which will most gain the love, and intend the welfare of those over whom God shall place you. With God, I would have you begin and end, who is King of kings, the sovereign disposer of the kingdoms of the world, who pulleth down one and setteth up another. The best government and highest sovereignty you can attain to is to be subject to him, that the scepter of his word and spirit may rule in your heart. The true glory of princes consists in advancing God's glory, in the maintenance of true religion and the church's good, also in the dispensation of civil power with justice and honor to the public peace. Piety will make you prosperous, at least it will keep you from becoming miserable, nor is he much a loser that loseth all, yet saveth his own soul at last. To which center of true happiness, God, I trust, hath and will graciously direct all these black lines of affliction which he hath been pleased to draw on me, and by which he hath, I hope, drawn me nearer to himself. You have already tasted of that cup whereof I have liberally drunk, which I look upon as God's physic, having that in healthfulness which it wants in pleasure. Keep you to true principles of piety, virtue, and honor. You shall never want a kingdom. However, Charles was destined for a life filled with sorrow. As the sculptor Bernini observed while gazing upon the triple portrait painted by Van Dyck, a tragic face. Those elegant yet fragile features were already marked by the foreboding shadow of a violent demise.